So over the past few years, Enlisted has become much of a better place. This could be seen in a lot of things such as the new addition of new weapons, the addition of new jets, but some things, in the other hand, haven't changed at all. In today's video, we are going to be describing one of those things that haven't changed, if not has gone worse in some regards. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the player-based system, how has it not been changed and in some regards been made worse, and what it has caused the Enlisted community to do. So without further ado, let's get started with the video. Starting with the entire player base issue. For those who don't know, every faction has a player base. However, every faction also has the issue of a player base being a player base, but at the same time, it can instantly disappear. For one, every week the player base is different. Generally every week, but it could be almost every day depending on the day. This is because every faction has a set amount of players, but every faction has an unknown amount of players, such as if Germany has more players than the USSR, then without a shadow of a doubt, the USSR is suffering, mainly because it doesn't have a lot of players. On the other hand, if you also have a faction like the USA, you generally don't have a lot more players compared to the Germans, hence the Germans always stomp the USA. This has caused Enlisted to do a few things such as buff the USA, buff the USSR, debuff the Germans, and in other regards it has buffed the Japanese to quite an interesting extent. And of course you have other things such as give certain weapons to the USSR and give certain weapons to the United States that are technically German but also helps buff the USSR and USA. In today's video, this is essentially what they call power buffing, and essentially buffs factions that haven't a lot of players. This is most famous with the USSR and most recently in the sense that they buffed a lot of weapons such as the Fedorov and various other weapons such as decreasing its recoil, but at the same time made other factions a little bit harder to play such as the Germans. This is mainly because of the fact that the USSR doesn't have a lot of players generally, and when it does, it instantly stomps the Germans, mainly because, well, let's just say the faction itself is pretty dang good. However, if you don't have a lot of players, what ends up happening is that the faction isn't good because you don't have a lot of players and you in turn get stopped. Hence, for Enlisted to remake this entire situation, Enlisted has decided to increase certain weapons, such as the Fedorov, which is actually insane as of right now, or essentially has buffed the USSR while debuffing other sections. That said, this issue could be solved very easily, and this is the fact that essentially what happens is that you just increase the player base. The reason why this is an issue, of course, is every faction is going to be essentially a little bit unbalanced, and if you have good players, what ends up happening is that you instantly get stomped, meaning that if you have players, you are pretty much almost going to win. If you don't have a lot of players, generally it doesn't matter how good the players are, you tend to lose. So that is an issue to talk about. This means inherently some factions are essentially worse than others, even though in paper or on paper they're much better than other factions, which is a problem if you cannot see the problem itself. Needless to say, this is an issue that Enlisted should solve, and the best way to solve this is to get more players. Enlisted gets new players and they decide, you know what, we're just gonna do what's popular, and as of right now, the most popular faction is Germany, and that is actually quite simple because, let's be honest, Germany is one of the most powerful factions in World War II, and a lot of people are going to be interested in Germany. But there are a lot of ways in which Enlisted can increase other factions that does not increase the player base. For example, give certain faction rewards such as let's play Germany for X amount of time, or let's play the USA X amount of times, or play Japan X amount of times. This usually and generally helps the situation. However, the issue as of right now is the fact that, well, once you do that, everyone's gonna play a certain amount of factions. For those who don't know, the Enlisted task as of right now is pretty much the same for every single person. What I suggest Enlisted to do is to mishmash the task. For example, a certain X amount of people has played the USSR, a certain amount of people have played Germans, a certain amount of people have played USA or played Japan. This makes a task of playing a certain faction no matter if they want to or not, which generally increases the amount of player base for a certain faction. This should almost come as a reward for playing this faction and not a liability. However, at the same time, everyone realizes this is not the easiest thing to solve. For example, they've been solving this for at least 2 to 3 years as of right now, so it is still an issue Enlisted has to solve somehow. And overall, what Enlisted players have done to counter this is essentially see what faction is the most popular as of right now, and jump on board. Which actually makes the situation worse if you really think about it, because if you just jump into the faction that actually wins, the faction that is losing is just going to be made even worse, which is not good for anyone, to be exact. Hence, this issue should be solved one way or another. So, without further ado, this is all of this video. The player-based issue is as of right now, and have a great day, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.